All right, good morning everyone and welcome to the second of our East Metro Health Service grant application series. My name is Daniel Fadovich and I'm the Director of Research for East Metro Health Service. And the aim of this series is to improve and optimise our grant applications to increase chances for success. And I believe we've got over 90 registrants today.
All right, good morning everyone.
Now, just so you all know, a bit of housekeeping, this session is being recorded and you can write questions in the Q&A bit of your Teams app at any time through the talk. So the focus of today's session is on the WA Future Health Research and Innovation Fund, often colloquially known as FHRI. And we're fortunate today to have John van der Valen as the chair of the Advisory Council speaking about the fund, and his backup also is Stacey Waters, who's the Director of the Research and Innovation Office in the Department of Health. So just a little bit of background about John. He is the inaugural chair of the fund and has been the Chief Executive of HBF since 2017. Prior to this, he spent over 30 years in insurance, wealth management, private banking and investments in a whole range of executive positions for global groups. If you look at his CV, it looks like we should also be asking him some investment questions, but I suspect he won't be taking those today. More recently, John has been a senior advisor for Blackstone and an independent non-executive on several boards. He's a board member of UWA's Business School and a non-executive director of the Royal Flying Doctor Service. He holds an MBA from UWA, studied at London Business School and Oxford University, and is a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So I'll stop talking and it's over to you, John, and then the format after that is really the opportunity to interact with John and Stacey and ask the questions to try and improve our applications. So thanks very much, John.
Okay, thank you. I'll do a quick sound check. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Thank you, Daniel, for that summary. And perhaps I should start there and say, well, what the hell is someone with 35 years of financial services and investment experience doing chairing a Future Health Research and Innovation Fund? And I think that's a really important place to start is whilst I'm CEO of HBF and on the Royal Flying Doctor Service and are broadly involved in the health ecosystem, my role is to ensure that the Future Health Research and Innovation Fund is well governed, that the grants that we make, that the applications we review are all in line with the strategy for the WA Health Department and making sure there's no conflicts of interest. So I'm a non-clinician. I am a governance experienced person that's run large groups, and that's really why I'm there to add value for the Future Health Research and Innovation Fund. I should also highlight that we absolutely know we've got to communicate, I think, in an improved manner across the community and also to the research community to answer many of your questions. So it's a great opportunity, and thanks for having me here today. I should start with the beginning that it's a fantastic initiative by the state government to launch such a fund, and things have got to start somewhere. It's a great fund. It is a large amount of money, but I should also say that it's not necessarily yet at the critical scale that I think as a state, and also when we compete on the global scale, that it's quite there yet. So let me give you the background. Is that the Sovereign Wealth Fund, as it's called or was, that receives royalties in terms of ongoing royalties out of mining and other areas, has about $1.7 billion in the fund. The interest earnings are allocated towards the Future Health Research and Innovation investment. I think I'll start there by, of course, stating that the interest earnings, therefore, we are looking to work with the government to increase the approach to investment, because at the moment, the structure means that we'll allocate from the fund around $80 million in the first 3 years. So by no means should I sneeze at that amount of money. It's a large amount of money, but in fact, if we increase the investment returns without taking too much risk, I believe we could increase that by around 50% to get it to $120 million over every 3 years. So that is an interesting one in terms of the strategy we need to focus on. And I think the government's made the first important step by setting up a fund, setting up an independent committee, making sure there's no conflicts of interest. It has been a learning experience, I think, for the committee, also for the health department, in ways in which we govern this properly and make sure that we look to an appropriate strategy to support innovation and medical research in Western Australia. And I do think we've done a great deal in the last 2 years. The first 12 months has been on setting up the programs, setting up the governance, making sure that we're aligned with the Sustainable Health Review. And I think, one of the statements I'd make is where we need to focus is making sure at the moment there tends to be, we spread the funds quite thinly. They go to a lot of people. And I think one of our next steps in the strategy is to be far more focused, because it's easy to spread the money thinly, and that keeps complaints down, it keeps researchers happier, but it doesn't necessarily give us the wins that we want. So I would forewarn people that one of the things the committee's wanting to do is be slightly more focused. So let's go deeper with larger amounts of money into more focused areas rather than spread ourselves thinly. So it's 80 million over the first 3 years. And actually that's not yet quite as significant as other states, but if we can get that up by around 50%, then it will be. Some of the notable achievements, I think, since the launch of the fund has actually been recently the $1.5 million to develop concepts in a competition to improve childhood mental health. We had 10 grants. We'll have 10 grants of 50,000 and then a prize winner for 1.5 million. And we're looking to continue with innovation around awarding of large prizes, and keep your ears open for something that we will launch with Minister Dawson coming up soon, because we believe that one of the ways to innovate in Western Australia is to encourage international investment and to encourage people who compete heavily for a prize to solve a specific health or research issue. One of the other things is that when we do provide grants, it often leads to additional funds. And as an example, in the funding of $10 million, the research recipients have actually been able to leverage an additional $12 million from that initial 10 million outlaid. So that's one of our other objectives, is making sure we can fund people who can then apply for additional grants to give it that scale. We currently have 2 major programs under development, and you'll have seen over the last few days there's been some major grants and initiatives, especially into Indigenous health, which is fantastic. And I would remind everyone that the success of the fund absolutely has got to be engaging with the community. I would encourage as many of you as possible to subscribe to the FHRI website and take the opportunities to be involved in that, so that you can receive our feedback and vice versa. I would like to acknowledge Minister Cook for the initial launch and since the active involvement also of Minister Dawson and his recent announcement on the intention to come out with a medical research strategy, which the Future Health Research and Innovation Fund will align with and work closely with government to make sure we've got a cohesive medical research strategy, and we'll make sure that we fit in well with that. So I think in summary, a couple of the points: it is 2 years on, we've provided a lot of funding. Summary point is we've spread ourselves quite thinly. I would say to you that my experience being a non-clinician and chairing the fund over the last few years is that no government has the funding to achieve the number of requests we receive. It isn't the magic pudding. That's why we've got to focus. And I do get the feeling that we get many comments or criticisms, because we could easily fund hundreds of millions of dollars of research, and that's not possible. So it's the difficult choice the committee has is which elements of the research or innovation do we focus on? How do we make those decisions, making sure that there's no conflict of interest? And how do we get our best bang for dollar in terms of the research we fund? And that's what we're trying to do. So look, I'll stop there. I have Stacey and myself, and I know most importantly you want to ask us questions around how you receive funding, how the fund's operating, or any areas that I think we can give you information on. So I'll stop there, Daniel, and take questions.
Thanks very much, John, for that introduction. So for the people who are online, this is your opportunity to ask those burning questions about how you can improve your grant application success chances, and also information about the fund. We don't have any questions online at the moment, but there are some pre-session questions that have been sent in to us. But before we get to those, Stacey, do you have any general recommendations or guidelines on somebody who's kind of just starting out on the research career and is looking to the FHRI fund as a potential funding source, what they should do to maximise their chances of success?
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks very much for having us here today. It's a really great question, and I think it's a fundamental question that researchers all over the world grapple with. I'm starting out, and how do I win that first grant to build my track record? So the Future Health Research and Innovation Fund is focused on investing in researchers and innovators in Western Australia. So from that perspective alone, it does provide a greater opportunity for our Western Australian researchers and innovators to achieve success in winning grants. Daniel, do you mind muting your hand? Thank you. So the Research and Innovation Fund does provide lots of opportunities. Currently, the way that we have been releasing grants has been we do have a plan with the Advisory Council, and we release grants through our email distribution list and through the website. In the future, we are hoping to move to a point where, now that we're a little bit more established, to actually have a program of grants that will be made publicly available really early on, so that you can see what's coming and you can plan your work and your grant development opportunities accordingly. So I think that will be the biggest, I think the single biggest helpful factor that the FHRI fund can do for you in the coming months, is to be able to see what's coming. When it comes to providing an application and submitting an application to us, we mirror the NHMRC and to some extent the ARC processes. So all of our grants will go out to an external panel of experts in that space. So they'll either be researchers who have experience in that space, or they'll be innovators who are also experienced. So please make sure when you're writing an application to the FHRI fund that your application is at the standard that you would expect for NHMRC or ARC or any other nationally competitive body, because we apply those same standards. The other thing that I would also recommend is that you engage with consumers now. Our applications will always want to see, and our review panels are briefed on consumer and community involvement, and we have a consumer and community partner, someone with lived experience on every single panel. They are not looking for token. I've talked with this consumer and they've provided me with some edits to my grant application. They're looking for evidence of your interaction and your integration of consumers into the development of your proposal. So I think those two things, having the forward plan of what's going to become available and planning your work around that, and really starting to engage with consumers now, are probably the biggest, most important things for you to do to be successful. Does that answer your question?
You're on mute, Daniel.
Can you hear me now? Yep. Sorry about that. That's really helpful, Stacey. Thank you. I think having a timeline on the website so people can see what's coming will be incredibly useful and helpful with planning. And it is worth emphasising that you really, to maximise your chances of success, you should not be writing your grant basically once the call comes out. You should actually be preparing it well beforehand. The consumer and community involvement is a really important element of grant applications now and is increasingly a mandatory requirement around the world, not only for getting your grant, but also for getting your paper published. There are some journals now who will not publish your paper if you do not have a consumer on your investigator group. Fortunately, in WA, we have what's called the CCI program, the Consumer and Community Involvement Program, really based through the WA Health Translation Network, who are really well advanced in providing that expertise, and I would strongly urge any future grant applicant to make contact with them early. So let's move on to another question. And it's nice to see that there are some online questions happening, but we've got plenty of time to hopefully get through them. Another question that we received was, will there be any programs to support broad research capacity, research infrastructure development? I'm not sure if that's best answered by Stacey or John.
You go, Stacey.
Just waiting for the red. Thanks, Daniel. I think there is, so for those of you who are familiar with the fund, we have a strategy which is guiding the decisions that the Advisory Council make in how we design our funding programs and how we then support research. For those who have seen the FHRI fund strategy, you will see that research capacity and infrastructure is actually the backbone of our current strategy, and that was really developed on purpose. So the strategy was developed by the entire sector a number of years ago, and that was the very clear message that we heard, was that we need to build our capacity and we need to support the infrastructure of research and innovation in Western Australia. So there have been some investments already in capacity and infrastructure. We've offered a lot of fellowship positions, which are really designed to take a clinician or someone who's an expert in their field and give them the time to research, to conduct research and to build those skills, which are really important. And we've also released a few infrastructure projects. So we've provided funding for biobanks as an interim support. We recently announced, I think it was yesterday, that we've funded linear clinical research to actually develop an early phase clinical trial centre up in Joondalup. So the fund has, I would say, has been largely focused on that so far. The Advisory Council at their meeting last week spent a lot of time, we had a whole day meeting together, and we spent a lot of time talking about the future direction of the fund. And so there will be a new strategy that is released by the FHRI fund that will align with the medical research strategy. And the focus will absolutely be on building our capacity and our infrastructure. And I'm not talking solely about power and lights and water and those sorts of infrastructure. I'm talking about things like biobanking and those key critical and clinical trial support and those sorts of things, those key critical infrastructure supports that enable research and good quality research in Western Australia. So yes, I think that we have already done a lot of that work, and the intention of the Advisory Council is to continue that work. I'm not sure if John wants to share any more on that, or if I've stolen the Advisory Council's thunder, but that's certainly our intention.
I'm happy to make a couple of comments on that, and I think the one you're right, Stacey. It's important we state what does infrastructure really mean. And the committee in the early days were very concerned. We were talking about, light, power, basic infrastructure. And what we didn't want was the funds of the innovation and research funds that we had allocated towards keeping the lights on, so to speak. So I think that's really important, that when we invest in infrastructure, the money is going towards sustainable infrastructure like biobanking that can be used by the research committee, the research community across the board, as opposed to individual researchers who are looking for assistance with business as usual costs, right? And that's the differentiator that we've set in the fund, rightly or wrongly. I should also address with everyone here, one of the points that we had addressed also early in the committee was there was in the past some, I would call, business as usual funding or existing programs that were within the health department that rolled into the first year of funding. And I'm pleased to say that that's now ceased. So the second year is true new money for research and innovation that's going towards the community, which I think is far more effective than perhaps the first year of the fund, Stacey.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. Thanks very much, Stacey and John. And look, just taking the infrastructure bit a bit further, and John's last point about previous health department funding, one of my regular soapbox comments about research is that we need to integrate research into everyday clinical practice. And one way that was part achieved in the last decade was that the health department set up those clinician research registrar positions for 12 months, which was a competitively applied for process. And then obviously with the changes and the rollover, that's kind of dropped off the radar. But I know from the feedback that I receive from clinicians, that was a popular program. And I was wondering if there was any hope or plans for that to be resurrected.
Thanks, Daniel. And as you know, the department, as John was talking to before, when the fund first started, we did have a transitional period where we took the Department of Health previously funded programs and we transitioned them into the fund. The Advisory Council were really clear with us that in order for them to continue those programs into the following year, they wanted to see a robust evaluation of those programs, which is good governance of the Advisory Council. It allowed them to see the program for a year and allowed them, and then allows us to provide the evidence as to why we should continue to support them. So the registrar program, we've also heard, Daniel, that it has a great impact in our research community. So that is currently the subject of a review that we're preparing to be able to present back to the Advisory Council. The other important point here is that I know that there is work that many of you may be involved in that the WHTN are helping to facilitate, to look at developing the academic careers of our clinicians, not just in HSPs, but across Western Australia. And that is something that the fund is also watching and something that we will likely take to the Advisory Council as a potential program into the future, where we're looking at how can we provide clinicians with an opportunity to actually develop some academic qualifications and really understand research and get to embed research into their practice. So yes, that program is being reviewed. I think there's a lot of other work happening across the sector, which is looking at clinician capabilities for research. And it's certainly a priority for us in the Department of Health to make sure that research becomes, my vision is for research to become BAU within the department, that it's not something that you have to beg to do, that actually it's an expected part of your BAU and your day-to-day. That's a massive cultural shift that will take some time, but that's our plan.
Thanks, Stacey. And so next question, which again is another question that we received prior to today. Are you able to share plans for further funding calls in mental health specifically?
Thanks, Daniel. So the Advisory Council, I'm not going to be able to give you a straight answer straight away, I'm sorry. The Advisory Council met last week to talk about its strategy moving forward. So we have a strategy that was developed from 2020 to 2022. So the Advisory Council are literally in the middle of reshaping and rethinking that strategy, which will guide the funding programs that we then develop in consultation with the Advisory Council. So our funding programs will likely shift if the priorities and the focus of the Advisory Council and its strategy also shift. So I can't commit to what programs we will have at this stage because we are in that state of review. What I can say is that mental health is actually written into the legislation. So mental health and Aboriginal health are two key pillars of the FHRI. So they will never change. It just depends what the funding programs look like because they'll have to align with the new strategy of the Advisory Council. So I can't tell you that, yes, this program is coming out in relation to mental health right now, but there absolutely will be funding programs into the future because it's a key component of the fund.
Thanks, Stacey, and apologies everyone. There's a little bit of a lag in the technical side of running this, but hopefully that won't bother you too much. So moving on to one of the online questions, I'm just checking if there is any information on when applications for FHRI submitted on 2 May will be advised of their success. I'm guessing that's probably a question for Stacey.
Thanks, Daniel. I've had several funding programs that opened and closed recently. I'm just checking which one that might have been, and I think you're referring to the Innovation Seed Fund. What I can tell you is that we have our panels that have been established and trained for that program. The applications have gone to the panels, and we hope to have. I mean, it will all depend on how long that process takes, but they are under review currently, and we will be notifying you as soon as possible.
Thanks, Stacey. Next question is, have all the 2021 Innovation Challenge applicants been notified of the outcomes of the Stage 1 Innovation Feasibility submissions?
Yes, I believe they have. If you haven't, please reach out to me directly because they should have been. So if not, I apologise, but please reach out to me directly and I'm happy to speak with you.
Next question. Thanks, Stacey. Next question I think is for John. It says, John, you mentioned that the funding will become less thinly spread and focus more deeply in some areas. What are the areas that the funding is likely to focus on?
Great, thanks for the question. And this, I would say, as the chair of the fund, is the most difficult element of the implementation. And that is that when you give 100, I'll just choose a number. If we give 100 people $50,000 each, we keep 100 people happy. If we change that to 20 people with a lot larger grants, we upset those 80 people who don't receive the 50,000. And one of the things that both the committee is really now, I think, right behind is too many small grants do not deliver the same level of effectiveness. And in Western Australia, we have to realise that one, we're not the global centre of the earth. Two, we don't have the magic pudding in terms of funding. So with the amount of money we have, we just need to make the right selections on where we think our skills and expertise in the state will have the most effect. That will in turn lead to, I think, a far better outcome in the long term for the research community, because if we become a focused centre of excellence in some areas and we achieve major success, that in itself will achieve more funding, more people seeing us as being the right area to deliver investment in. I do want to keep highlighting that point that I'm working and pushing the government hard on changing the investment thesis to the fund. And I do believe we will have more money in the current environment. Not many people on the line will celebrate increasing interest rates, but in fact, increasing interest rates will help produce more cash. And therefore, I'm hoping that over the next few years, we have a larger sum of money. Now, that's slightly dodging the question of which is the areas we'll focus on more. And clearly, as Stacey outlined, mental health will be a key component, as will Aboriginal health. But there'll be other elements within that the committee over the next period will make its final decisions on, and that's up for discussion.
Thanks very much, John. There's another question now. Does the fund consider cross-jurisdictional research which have major impacts on health outcomes, such as the social determinants of health, or does it have a narrower health-only focus? I'm not sure who's best placed to address that one.
I'll take that, and I think I'm already on screen, so I might just repeat the question just in case. So the question was, does the FHRI consider cross-jurisdictional research which has major impacts on health outcomes such as the social determinants of health, or does it have a narrow health-only focus? So great question. The Future Health Research and Innovation Fund looks at health and medical research and innovation. So it will not be restricted to just medical research. It clearly has a remit to look at health research as well. Answering that question accurately is tricky because I'm not sure what you mean by cross-jurisdictional. In that, I'm assuming you're meaning across jurisdictions across Australia. The FHRI fund really does want to make sure the money that we award is spent here in Western Australia to benefit our population, because it is money that's generated in Western Australia. So while we are really supportive, like any funding body, of having multiple investigators on a grant, the research should be happening here in Western Australia. So that has been very much a focus. So yes, we will consider cross-jurisdictional research, but the work should happen here. And yes, the fund will always look at health and medical research. It's not just simply focused.
Okay, thanks, Stacey. Next question. If we are bringing a commercial partner into a grant application, what commitment is expected from them, and what form should that commitment be in? For example, a letter of intent or a formal agreement, etc., noting that often a partnership may not progress if the grant is not successful.
Thanks for that question, and again, another really good question. It will all, unfortunately, depend on the grant that you're writing for. So there will be some grants where it's not relevant to bring in a commercial partner, and there'll be others where we absolutely want you to because it's an innovation focused, it's a focus, etc. Our guidelines and conditions are really robust that we write in here. So I would imagine that if we were explicitly asking for commercial partner involvement, that we would outline what it is that you need. But if it's not an explicit component of a funding program and the guidelines and conditions, then a letter of support or a letter of intent would actually probably be sufficient, but it will all depend on what the program is.
Thanks, Stacey. I've been advised there are some bandwidth issues that are slowing down our going live from different people, so apologies for that. I noticed that the follow-up to what Amanda Stafford wrote about social determinants of health, she's written, is it about work over different areas such as housing, justice, etc.? I don't know, Stacey, if you wanted to add anything to what you said before.
Really happy to, and thanks for the clarification, Amanda. So yeah, we would never discriminate against working across other government agencies or other jurisdictions from or disciplines, I guess is what I would perhaps the term I'd be using. So as long as the grant funding call, as long as your application and your potential program or innovation still meets the guidelines and conditions and the requirements of the call for applications, then you absolutely should be. You know, the best research we can do, I believe, is cross-discipline and research. So I would never discount that in any way.
Thanks, Stacey, and there's still time for more questions if people want to write them in. So I've got another question, which I'm afraid will probably be for you, Stacey. A lot of people obviously fail in their grant applications, and that's just part of the course in research. Is it possible for the fund to provide some targeted feedback for applicants who've failed, which I realise, of course, is an additional burden for the fund, but is there some element of feedback available?
Thanks, and I again think that's a really good point, because feedback is always how we grow and develop. Just getting a unsuccessful letter is not always overly helpful. It's the unsuccessful, and this is why that can be really helpful. I know for the recent innovation challenge, we did the panel did put together some feedback for our applicants because they felt really passionate about giving feedback to the people who took the time to present to us. But it will vary by application. But you can always contact the grant liaison officer within the Research and Innovation Office if you have any questions about your application. And I think it is something that we need to start looking at, is how can we provide some feedback without it becoming really onerous when you get, you know, say 100 applications for a grant round. Providing feedback on all 100 is difficult. So we will try and integrate it a little bit more, but you're always welcome to contact us if you'd like to speak to your particular application in detail.
Thanks, Stacey, and your offers of help and being available for contact are very much appreciated. So my next question is to John, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot a little bit. So as chair of the Advisory Council, what is the Advisory Council's vision for, let's say, 10 years from now, if things go the way you would like them to go, and things often don't, but where would you like to see both the fund and medical research in WA in 10 years' time as a result of the fund's activities?
Thank you. Another good question. So perhaps, and this one becomes, I think, quite personal. I'll link in a few important points here. One is that, you know, as a West Australian that's lived around the globe and returned about 6 years ago, one of these points is we have this amazing economy, but heavily linked to resources. So true diversity I believe, in 10 years' time in Western Australia has to come from industries outside of resources. And therefore, I think medical research and health in particular is clearly an industry that needs more skills. It's going to continue with employment and development. So in 10 years' time, the ultimate aim would be for Western Australia to have a medical research and innovation community that is driving alternatives for long-term economic sustainability. And I say this independently. I'm the person that I'm not a clinician. I don't add value in the sense of the research knowledge. I add value to the committee with respect to strategy, with economics, with diversification, making sure that we're well governed. And so the vision, I think, on the formation of the fund, things like if we can get more invested, if we can have some true successes in translatable research that really earmarks Western Australia globally as somewhere that you want to come and live, you want to come and research in, and that we've got the best labs, the best infrastructure, then that would be both an economic outcome for the state, a diversity outcome, and something that ultimately delivers, you know, sustainable benefits in terms of people's health. So I think, you know, we're starting on this journey. The innovation of having the fund in itself was a great decision, and I'm certainly someone that doesn't think we've got it right yet, but we're taking the steps in the right direction. But I would hope that, and we all know, I keep hearing the statistic which was alive and well before the formation of the FHRI fund, is that WA is not receiving its appropriate allocation from federal funding. And I'm as the strategist on the committee, I look at it and say, well, if that's been happening for a decade, why is it happening? How do we fix that rather than just complain about it? So something that we've got to do in the fund as well is get our fair share of federal funding and then focus on diversity of the economy as well. And let me finish on that. I watch and I want to encourage people on the line, I watch the passionate researchers who are far smarter people than me, who are focused on the health outcomes, and that is just brilliant. If I can help WA focus on the economic diversity, the surprise then is you just get more money. And what we need is more money and investment. I'll try and focus on that piece and let the brilliant medical and research community do their piece, but the two have to work together, right? There is no use doing brilliant research without funding. In fact, funding comes first and brilliant research often comes second, but the two have got to work really, really well together.
Thanks very much, John, and what you've said is music to my ears. And I think a simple summary might be that success breeds success. We've now had another online question. So writing grant applications is very time consuming. Is there any thought of having a two-stage process with an expression of interest followed by an invited full application where ideas are more likely to be successful? And I think this is a question for Stacey, but I have to say this is something that I'm personally supportive of.
Thanks, Daniel. And unfortunately, I think you were cut off at the end there. So I'll just quickly repeat the question. So writing grant applications is time consuming. Is there any thought of having a two-stage process where an expression of interest followed by an invited full application where ideas are more likely to be successful? Daniel finished that off by saying it's an area he's really passionate about. So I think yes, it's always on the table, and I think it's really important to hear from the research community to hear what their concerns are with writing grant applications and the fund in general. So it is a point taken. There are pros and cons to it, which we would need to explore, and I think some funding calls lend themselves more to that. So those of you who applied to the Innovation Challenge will have realised that there was sort of a, there's an interim application, and then we're giving 10 people some funding to do a proof of concept, and then we can start to, then we can fund one person. Similarly, there will be some innovation programs that may be coming in the near future, which will also act in a similar way, where we don't need lots of information from you up front. So it will depend on the actual funding application as to whether or not it does lend itself to that. The one thing I will add is that the WA Near Miss Awards, which the fund has continued to fund, are actually a really good example of this. So what we're doing with the WA Near Miss Awards is we're saying if you've submitted to NHMRC and you were a near miss, and we use the cutoff scores that the NHMRC provide, you don't need to resubmit a new application. You simply send us your previous application with your score, and we'll provide funding to those who are the highest ranked to get on with that program and try and build a bit more of a track record to make you competitive in the following year. I think that's an excellent example of making sure that people don't have to reinvent the wheel, and it's a great way of us building the capacity of our researchers in Western Australia to be able to then be competitive for our national share. So we have discussed that at length length in here, and we are really wanting to make sure that we minimise the burden on researchers. I was a researcher for many years. I know the time it takes to write a grant application, so no one wants to put you through that if we don't have to. So taken on notice, we do have some programs that do that, and we'll consider that how we can better reduce your time up front in our future funding rounds.
Thanks, Stacey. We don't have any more questions online, and I think I've exhausted my bank of questions. So I think we'll probably wind up now, but before I do actually wind up and give thanks to everybody, I'm just wondering if John or Stacey have any final comments they'd like to make.
Look, I think one summary from me, just from everyone on the line and then the broader research community, is this is complex. It's difficult to fund everyone. We have to have a focused strategy, but we're learning along the way. And I certainly think in the second year we've made far more progress than in the first year. One of the points that I know Stacey and as certainly a welcomed new contingent to the committee, an active person, is I think have to acknowledge we weren't communicating well enough with the research community, and we're now doing that in an improved manner. We will continue to do that, but we will be more focused, and we'll also, I think, start to interact a little bit more with both the committee and the community, which is also important.
Thanks, John. And we've had another 3 questions, so we've got the time for it, but we will aim to finish either at 12 o'clock or before if the questions run out. So somebody's written, can the application be the same as the NHMRC Ideas Grant application? For example, the MRFF is so different. It is really time consuming for a researcher to write the same idea grant in another format. And obviously I can only agree with that statement, but
agreed, and I think we absolutely should be trying to mirror processes, and I know Minister Dawson is also really keen to make sure we stop duplication in process and work together as a Team WA in greater focus. So I think that will come. My only statement will be, yes, we can absolutely do that if there's a funding call that is similar to the NHMRC Ideas Grant. So obviously if we're doing a totally an innovation call, that the application form would need to look slightly different. So so yes, we will absolutely take that on, that we should try and align with the NHMRC Ideas Grant where it's appropriate.
Thanks, Stacey. So the next question might be a bit more challenging, and I suspect it's more for Stacey. How do we support efficient access to data for research by busy clinician researchers in the absence of an electronic medical record?
So not much I can do about the electronic medical record. I know that is a bigger piece of work that's been looked at by the Sustainable Health Review, so I'll leave that for those experts to explore. But I do know that there are issues with access to data across Western Australia. Happily, I can let you know that there have been massive strides taken by the Department of Health over the last 12 months, and now the Office of Digital Government, who are standing up a whole of government approach to providing access to data for researchers. The Department of Health similarly has established its data linkage expert advisory group, and we will soon be launching our strategy for linked data across the department. So we're increasing our technical capabilities, so we'll be introducing an e-research platform and other really great enabling programs, and our data linkage strategy here will look at the entire lifespan of data linkage, from the application process, our review processes, and our the way in which we deliver linked data, including the e-research platform. But then complementing that, the Office of Digital Government is also working on a whole of government approach to accessing data. So I think it's only going to get better. We just have to give it a little bit of time to get better, but there are plans in place.
Thanks, Stacey. And I think if I can add to that, that's relevant, is your office is planning to run a governance review of research with the similar goal of making it hopefully more streamlined. So there's another question here, which I suspect is probably for Stacey as well. The near miss grant is currently restricted to Australian citizens and permanent resident holders, whereas the NHMRC grants are open to New Zealand citizens as well. Are there plans to change this in the future and open the opportunities to New Zealand citizens?
Thank you, and another great question. I don't know that there are any plans for that at this point in time, but that's good to know that that's an issue, and I will take that back and we'll consider that, and I'll make sure the Advisory Council also consider that in the future. The requirement would still be that the research has to happen here in Western Australia, but we will make sure that we give that due consideration, because I think that's a good point. So thank you for raising it.
Okay. Ooh. Okay, thanks very much, Stacey. I think we're probably going to wind up now, because I suspect Stacey's voice might be getting a bit hoarse but it's been really valuable to get your expert feedback. John spoke earlier with a final comment. Do you have a final comment you might like to make to everybody attending?
Thanks, Daniel. I really would, if that's okay. I really reiterate John's comment that the Advisory Council has spent 2 years setting up this incredible opportunity for us in Western Australia. We're really at the point now where the Advisory Council are positioned to be able to take the reins and to really provide clear direction to the department for how we best move forward with the fund. So I'd really like to let everyone know that the Advisory Council and the department are really moving forward with a very focused approach with our strategy, but we're also moving forward with a very clear remit that we need to be engaging more with the sector. So this opportunity with the East Metro is fantastic, and these are the types of things that we're now looking at doing across the medical research and innovation sector in Western Australia. So there will be a lot more opportunity for you to engage with us and for us to hear from you, and that might include presentations such as this, opportunities to come and speak with the Advisory Council, and everything in between. So we'd like to thank you for your patience while we've been setting up this incredible fund, and really want to let you know that we really want to start engaging, so you'll be hearing a lot more from us in the future.
Thanks, Stacey. And there's one final question. I'm going to make this the final question, and then we'll end the session. This question is, are advanced therapies such as cell and gene therapies on the radar for funding? What is the best way to inform the government of the existing expertise in WA and the unique opportunities for growth in this area?
Thanks, and I think nothing is off the table for what the fund will support. So, but it's this opportunity for people like yourself, Sladibor, to raise those issues with us, to tell us about the amazing work that you're doing, so that the Advisory Council can understand that and the whole ecosystem, as John likes to call the research ecosystem. But it's a great opportunity for us to hear the amazing work that's out there and the innovators that we have in our system and where we need to invest our money. So it's exactly that we need to hear about, so that we can make sure our funding is aligned with the needs of the community. So we will absolutely be in contact and have more opportunities for people like yourselves to bring those ideas to us so that we can consider them.
Thanks very much, Stacey. So I'm going to end the session there. Before we end, first of all, I want to thank very much John and Stacey for their expert contribution. This has been a really invaluable opportunity for the fund to reach out to the researchers, but also for the researchers to interact with the fund. And maybe we might ask you to do something again like this next year. I'm pretty sure also that the session will be available online, and a link will be sent out to all the registrants later. And I also want to thank especially the invisible person behind the scenes, Sharon Humphries, who's our East Director of Innovation and Research, who's been the production manager of this and obviously needs faster internet in her office. So thanks very much, because these things don't happen by themselves. I'm really grateful for everybody's support. And finally, if you have any feedback about a session like this, where you think we could improve it, or if you have other ideas that might be useful for researchers getting together, please provide that feedback to our research hub at East. So thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of the day. And once again, thanks so much to John and Stacey for your contributions. Thank you.